It is with extreme honor that I would like to open up the first in the interview series on the show here. These are some gentlemen that I've known for a while and have seen extreme success and have fired the man in their own lives. We will get into what that means in a second, but I would just like to take a second to introduce David and Ken, absolute legends, Amazon rock stars of the space. Welcome to the show.
Pat Lum, great to be here, man. Great to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Pat.
It is fantastic, and you guys have an exceptional track record of just being so humble, so helpful with folks and sharing your knowledge, and just so that's the reason this makes so much sense. Is the first show for me is just that you were in a place where I think some of the listeners are now, where you're thinking about Amazon. You know that there's opportunity there, that it makes sense to sell stuff online. It's always made sense, but it's just how do you get into it? And so, and I guess my first question is just someone who's looking at this and thinking it's impressive is just personally, how did you guys get into it? How did this idea even cross your minds to sell stuff online, and how did it progress from there?
Yeah, for sure. David, you want to go first, or you want me to go?
You go ahead and take it, Ken.
Awesome. So I'll give you my tour here. So mine started in 2017. I was at the time a network engineer, working for the man, and my daughter came in. It was like, I think it was like Christmas time. My daughter she was probably like 10, I think, at the time, and she came and said, "Dad, look at this video on YouTube." So we're sitting there like looking at it, and then an ad popped up. And guess what? Lo and behold, it was an Amazon Guru ad. It was one of the Lambros leaning on a Lambo. And I watched the ad, I was like, "What's that?" And then so I watched it, and she left. I pulled out my phone, and I was like, "Well, I got to go find this," and I started looking into it, and because I'd always wanted to open a business. And so that was from the beginning there. I thought, man, I was like, that looks easy. Like that's something that I know I can do. And so I just slowly started. This was 2017. And then I just slowly learned. So I bought a course early on, and I learned all the free stuff I could on YouTube. I consumed hundreds of hours of YouTube videos, just learning and learning. And it kind of, what attracted me to it is like online is like, at the time, my day job was at home working I had an office to go to, and I worked from home. But in my mind, like, scaling makes sense. I'm like a efficiency, like, you can scale on a website, right? And so if you have a physical store, you're limited to however many people are in that physical area, whereas online sales were unlimited. And so it really piqued my interest. And that was kind of the first point in that. And then, kind of moving on from there, I think, Pat, we probably met in 2018, I would say, probably late 2018, and then kind of scaled up from there. So that was kind of the beginning for me. And I'll kick it over to David.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I've had the entrepreneurship bug since I was a kid. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and me and my younger brothers had a pumpkin patch, and we sold the hell out of pumpkins. It started small, but we grew it into kind of a pumpkin empire. And that got the wheels turning early, that I wanted to be involved in business, and I wanted to be a business owner. Went to college. My major was in accounting and finance. And, I graduated at age 22 and didn't have any money or ideas. And so I ended up going to work at a consulting firm, and where I spent the next 8 years working for the man. And it was a good experience. I learned a ton about business, but I reached a point probably 2016, 2017, where I wanted to do something different. And I had a really long commute into work. And so I'd listen to podcasts about selling on Amazon every day. Scott Volker, he was like one of the OGs in this space.
Great.
Listened to a ton of his content, and decided to launch my first product, and with the intention of leaving my job. And as we'll probably get into later in the podcast, it took a lot longer than I thought. But started that business, and met Ken. Probably, what was it, 2019, I think, that we met.
Yeah.
And let me just go right into that. So I had started on meetup.com, the St. Louis E-commerce Club. And a lot of people would come to those meetings, but Ken came and he liked to dive deep into like what's working in his business. And we found ourselves going to lunch, grabbing drinks. Like we were both aimed in the same direction. And so that was the early days of Ken and I working together. He had a ton of skills in digital marketing and running an Amazon store. I had a background in accounting and finance. And so I think we ended up signing NDAs and we just helped each other with our businesses. I was like, I can add value here on your P&L and come and take a look at my listings. And in fact, one of the first pieces of advice he gave me was call Pat Lum and quit self-managing PPC. And that was how we got to know each other, Pat. So yeah, that's a little bit of background on myself and how Ken and I got started.
I didn't know it was Meetup. That's how I met my co-founder as well. It was meetup.com. So I was you, I think, in that scenario, David. Did you host the group?
Yes. And
yeah,
there's for
Yeah.
anyone listening, I think networking events generally are kind of awkward unless you're hosting. Because if you're hosting, people just come up and talk to you and it kind of eliminates that. And so, yeah, I would say if there's not a meetup in your area, start one. And if there is, go to one. They're super fun. And I think especially in the e-commerce space, we're really not competing against each other. Generally, we're not selling in the same category. And so, you meet the right people and they'll really open up on, hey, this is what's working. This is who I'm using for PPC. This is my sourcing agent. And podcasts are great. Meetups are, I think, also great.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about the groups because, and I think, yes, just to expound on that point, David, a lot of folks are nervous going to these things, but if you're the host, you have a reason to talk to everyone, and then you'll find your Ken eventually, if you will be so lucky as to find your Ken. I think we both had that experience. So you guys are at the meetup group and just starting to help each other a little bit. And did you have were you selling product at this point, David, or are you just getting started?
Yeah, I was just getting started. I probably had 30 SKUs at that time.
Okay.
Was sub 6 figures in terms of revenue, just getting started, working out of my basement. Still had a full-time job as did Ken. And so we were grinding away in the hours before work and after work and calling vendors on the lunch hour. So God, I don't miss those days.
I think for me, whenever I was, I had just turned the corner of going, when I started on Amazon, I was doing retail arbitrage. So, I'm taking my phone around to the store, going to the clearance aisles and doing retail arbitrage. So I moved from that into wholesaling. And I was still doing wholesaling. I think when I met David, I had started one private label brand. And so I had two accounts, one that was wholesale, one that was private label, and kind of in that transition mode, like testing what is working, what's not. And yeah, I think I had, I don't know, 4, maybe like 2 products on the private label side, and still trying to ramp up wholesale, and then figuring out, yeah, this is not going to be long-term for me. So yeah, super early on days. And I think what was interesting was, the meetup, the first one I went to, it was probably like, I don't know, 5 people there. And then the second one, there was 8. And then the third one, there was 15. I mean, it grew pretty rapidly in like 6 months time. And there was, I don't know, I think probably 30 or 40 people. We had presentations, and this was all pre-COVID. And so it was interesting. Like more and more people were showing up, and then David and I were like at the end, like, yeah, we'll answer any questions, and so we were getting hammered with questions at the end of the meetup. And so I'm like, whatever. So like an hour later, everybody leaves, and we look at each other. We're like, man, what, I can't remember if it was David or myself. One of us was like, we should do a podcast and just answer everybody's questions. And then we wouldn't get cornered after the meetups. And so that was kind of the early stages of firing the man. So.
Do you find that, did you have any aha moments from that meetup series that you can recall? It sounds like you guys brought really different skill sets to the table that were somewhat complementary. Do you remember having any sort of conversations where things started to click and you feel like that accelerated the e-com business at all?
Yeah, I would say pretty early on, like, I'm going to use the word like nerd out, really like going into detail in terms of like data and Amazon reports and stuff. Ken was passionate about it. And um, that was exciting to me because I'm a CPA by trade, and gosh, I love spreadsheets. I love digging into data, and he was just as passionate about that with me. He was also, one thing that I noticed was he had an end game, and that was to quit his job. The same thing with me. He had a family. I had a family. We were kind of pointed in the same direction, and so sometimes when you meet people, you just mesh and you get along well. And I would say that's kind of what led to us ultimately forming a partnership and having a podcast and going into business together.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you find that? It's strange. I have seen this pattern where a lot of CPAs, actually, the skill set seems to lend itself really well to Amazon FBA. I don't know why, but would you say that it would help for people to have a basic knowledge of accounting if they're going to do an Amazon business?
Yes, it would help, but boy, it shouldn't hold you back from starting a business. One thing I like about this industry is you go to like Prosper, for instance, that's the biggest e-commerce show in the world. You're going to meet accountants, engineers, people, like literally all walks of life can be involved in e-commerce. And I would also say that accounting is something that you can sub out. I mean, I'm a CPA, we have a bookkeeper. That is something that you can outsource. And so I would say to run an Amazon business, there's probably like 25 skill sets that you need or that are helpful. Most likely you are only good at 3 or 4 of them. And you need to find people for those other, 20 or 21. And so, yeah, it was helpful on the accounting side of things. However, if somebody is listening and has no accounting background or knowledge, do not let that hold you back. Just jump in and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of like looking through my lens pad, like, meeting David, my background is in cybersecurity and information technology, IT. I was in network design for a long time. And so I had some of the technical skills and marketing and stuff. And so when I met David and kind of pouring through, I knew my numbers at like a level 1, and so I was pushing on the gas really hard on everything else. But knowing your numbers, you can get to a certain point, but then it's like a house of cards. You're kind of juggling it. And so when I met David and, we started looking at each other's business details and everything. And I noticed that like David had this knack for looking at deep data and spreadsheets and trending. And I was like, holy crap, like this is next level. Like I did not have that, I'm looking at like basic Excel, like adding here and so like for me coming from networking background and so he brought a whole new world of like, and David did his accounting and A side, which was also like, exiting businesses, which was super exciting to me. And so listening to and learning about that was like really, it was an aha moment for me. It's like, oh, I can take this thing that I'm building, that I'm enjoying building, and then I can exit it someday. And this is how I add value to that by knowing my numbers and looking at all this. And so, yeah, it really elevated my game, partnering with David and also like learning more about M&A and about accounting and knowing my numbers, because that was not my skill set. So just like David said, there's so many different skill sets that go with running an e-commerce business. And you can exercise and flex muscles and just learn those, or you can bring in talent, hire, outsource. So, but yeah, don't let it hold you back.
Yeah. So you guys you're at the meetup, you're talking, you're exchanging information, things start to click and get interesting, and you both have that goal of firing the man, the name of your podcast. The reason is sort of, I think a lot of people have a why, and for them that's a big part of it. When would you advise that people start looking at actually firing the man versus, because you got to keep a low profile initially. You're not making cash, you're buying inventory. In fact, it's the opposite. You're putting money down. So how do you think about that, of that build up, nights and weekends, and then eventually making the transition.
Sure.
Absolutely. Let me tackle the first part of this. I'm going to kick it over to Ken. From a number standpoint, if you want to start your own business, I would not recommend quitting your job. Keep that source of income coming in. When I started seriously thinking about firing the man, I laid out some metrics. And one of the metrics that I laid out was, how much cash flow do I need per month? Like, what are my living expenses? And say you want to replace your salary, right? Well, for this example, say your salary is $80,000. That's the number you need to hit. When you achieve net income of $80,000, in my opinion, that is not the right time to quit. And here's the reason why. You quit your job, you now pull that $80,000 cash out of your business. You've got nothing else to reinvest into inventory, into new products, into growth. And so the metric that I laid out was between 2 and 3 times. I wanted my net income to be between 2 and 3 times my living expenses. And so as a result of that, I didn't pull any money out of the business for 4 years. And that allowed me to, my cash conversion cycle sped up. I was able to reinvest all my profits into new products, into a team. And so I would say, like, holding on to that day job is key in that phase. Now, it also is not all or nothing. Like, you could go from full-time to part-time. You could go from full-time into maybe another full-time job that's relevant to the e-commerce industry, to where you're learning. Or you could, completely fire the man. But it's that was a metric that I paid pretty close attention to and had it mapped out in terms of, when I hit this, I'm going to execute. And that's what I ended up doing. And Ken, I would say you were the one that fired the man first, and your plan was like way more detailed than mine. Mine was like in a spreadsheet. So
I don't know about that. So Pat knows me. I lean more on the visionary side. So I play in kind of the visionary world. And so I had a plan that so kind of to piggyback on what David said. So, for me, I was growing my company and with the intentions of exiting it. I wanted my time, I had my boss, he was a nice guy, but not someone that I wanted to high five every day and spend 10 hours with, right? And then get 0 raise at the end of the year. So my intent was exiting my day job. And so, growing the company, and there was like no real plan on that. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And so I essentially hired a business coach and someone that had already fired the man. Cause I forgot what book, my memory is horrible, but one of these books back here on this shelf, I read somewhere, it's like the quickest way to get somewhere is find someone that's been there and ask them how they did it. And so that's what I did. I hired a business coach and said, hey, my goal is to quit my day job. And so we put a plan together. The rough plan was, like David mentioned, you need a salary, you need to replace your salary. You can't pull too much money out of the company. For me, I wanted to have 6-month living expenses in cash for emergencies and insurance. And there was a couple of other small little details, but essentially that was it. And once I sat down and mapped it out, and it was like a 9-month plan to get there. And I executed that in 3 months. Cause I was like, this is not like, I can see it now. I'm like, oh, wow, this is easy. Like, it's all laid out. I just need to go do the work. And so executed that in 3 months. That was, I don't know, coming up almost 3 years ago. And so, on the other side of that, it was very emotional and scary and like the unknown at the time. But looking back at that, no regrets at all. But it's definitely something you don't want to rush into. You want to take your time and have a good plan. And at the end of the day, I always had in my back of my mind was like, well, what is the worst thing that can happen? The sky's not going to fall down on me. The worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have to go back and get another job that I was doing in the first place. And so that's not too bad of a backup plan.
There'll always be jobs.
Yeah.
But there's one dream. So So you guys wouldn't have done it any faster, say, if you could do it again? Like you feel like Ken, it was a 9-month plan you did in 3?
Yeah. So when we had mapped it out, it's like, hey, I need to replace my salary. I need to get insurance. I need to do all these things. And we kind of mapped it out, and it was more of on the cautious side of, hey, I can hit these and this. And then I wound up hitting it earlier, due to, scaling up revenue, selling more, also I trimmed down my expenses. Probably one of the things that helped the most was I looked at my lifestyle. Do I need all these Starbucks coffee? Do I need all this stuff? I literally removed anything. I drove at the time like a Ford Raptor, like a badass truck. Don't need that. I downgraded to a Jetta, and so like I literally squeezed. There was 2 ways to do it. You can make more money, and you can spend less. And so I attacked it from all the angles, because I literally wanted to exit and have my own free time, because I saw something that was working really well. This business that I was like cultivating, and the more the bulk of my time was working for the man. And I'm like, the faster I can stop working for the man and start working for myself, the better off I'm going to be. And so that really motivated me to push down on the pedal.
And how long did you have the business prior to sort of setting this 3 to 9 month plan?
Yeah, I would say it was probably in that 2 to 2.5 year range.
Okay.
Yeah.
And David, I think it was like 4 years. You said something like that.
3 or 4 years. One thing I'll point out is when I started, I kind of dipped my toe in the water. It was just kind of like, let's just kind of see what happens. And after about a year, I was like, I'm going to take this very seriously. And so I had to be at work at 8:30. And so from 4:30 to 7:30, I would literally clock in as if I was going to an employer. And I started treating it like another job. And I would carve out weekends where I am only going to work on the business. And it is when I took it seriously that we started to see a lot more growth, of course. But I think a lot of people dip their toe into the water, and when you are just putting a couple hours in a week, you're not going to get great results. Like treat it like a business, treat it like another job. It is a grind. It sucked getting out of bed at 4 a.m. But like in hindsight, boy, am I glad that I did that.
Yeah. And did you guys find that? What was the feeling like when you sort of gave in your 2 weeks? You're just, or you've been working on this for years, right? And this is the culmination of all that effort put into a single moment. I don't know if you have any particular recollections of that, but
yeah, David, go ahead.
I freaking cried, man. I
that's what it deserves. Like,
yeah, like yeah. It was tears of joy. I also had yes, our podcast is called Firing the Man. I had a great job. I worked with awesome people and I learned a ton. And, when people leave, you always say, let's stay in touch. And sometimes you do, but it's not the same. And so it was a lot of emotions like coming into it, but I called a couple partners in for a meeting and told them, and the night before, my son had been awake all night long, and so I was tired. I just lost my shit, and but it was super exciting. What I'll tell you is that prior to putting in place my plan, I had thought, well, I'm going to leave my job when the discomfort leaves, and I can tell you, the discomfort did not leave. You just kind of have to set criteria, draw a line in the sand, and say, when I hit this mark, I'm going to do it. And so, but no, it was super exciting. Also had some discomfort for sure. But because we had laid out this plan, I had seen Ken do it. We started a podcast called Firing the Man. 6 months into it, Ken quits. I mean, and I'm a pretty risk averse person. I had a steady job and I had this podcast about quitting your job. I felt like I was having an affair. And I didn't want anyone to find out about it. And anyway, so having seen Ken go through it and seeing that it worked, it made me feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah. So to touch back on that, when we started our podcast, yeah, we must have been crazy. I don't know what we were thinking. But we decided to name the firing the man, and we both had jobs. And so for me, I didn't really care as much. David was more risk averse. Plus, his firm was local where mine was based out of Colorado. And so he was always, like, it was we had kind of tap dance around it, right? You're talking about growing businesses and quitting your job, and if your boss sees it or hears about it or whatever. So it was kind of, yeah, it was a little bit, I guess we were a little bit crazy, but it worked out. So for me, I think, it really kind of fell in my lap. Like, so I was managing a team of engineers, and my company had went through a buyout, and so it was a hot mess with the leadership, and so they had to downsize, and so they sent out a buyout program, and I got the email, and it said, hey, distribute this to your people and all this, and I looked at it and I'm like, oh wow. Like, because this was in that period, how I said, like, this was another thing that went from 9 months to 3 months. When I got that, I said, oh wow, like I wasn't quite where I needed to be, but this right here stretched me out, because I think it was like 2 weeks pay for every year, or 4 weeks pay for, it was enough to get me to where I needed to be for that 6 month living expenses. So I saw that, and I had to like tap dance around with my director and said, hey, like, I'm going to put in for, so anyway, long story short, they accepted it. And so I don't remember if I cried or not, but I know I was really emotional and when I left, it was kind of like, it was really a weird, like, because I had worked from home, and then it was just like this emptiness. Now I went from managing a team of engineers and working 14, 16-hour days, because, like David, I got up early, worked on the business at night. And so now I went from all of that to like just working for myself. And at the time, I didn't have a huge network of entrepreneurs as friends and peers. And so it was an odd time to really had to like settled in, but it was definitely meaningful. Like, I could literally, my daughter had a singing recital middle of the day. I'm going over there and going to see that. My son's got soccer practice. I'm going to coach his soccer. So that kind of stuff, like, just immediately shot to the top of the list of priorities, things that I could go do anytime I wanted to. And so it was a really, really cool experience to go through that.
Yeah, this is really inspirational for people who are listening. I just listen to it a couple times, even if you want to just, because it started with just some products, right? Just a few things. And I guess, Dave, you made a really interesting point about it taking longer than you thought a little bit earlier. I think that's always, it's been my personal experience too. It just, these things seem to take a while, but I guess stuff that takes a long time tends to also have a little bit more staying power. I don't know where I'm going with that exactly, but I think it's a good advice not to rush it.
Yeah, I mean, and what I'll tell you is, in that 4 years, we definitely had some success, also had a ton of failures. And that's something that people don't talk about, is like, boy, have we had some dud product launches. Boy, have we like majorly screwed up and had issues. And that's something, like, if you're getting into this industry or thinking about it, there is a 100% chance that you'll mess up, make mistakes, and the only thing you can do is learn from it. Like, beating yourself up over it is not helpful. But like, the first product I launched was candlestick holders. And I'll give you a little story on this. If you think of like a 6-inch candle that you'd hold in your hand, there's a little cardboard thing that goes above your hand so the wax doesn't drip on it. And I was on Jungle Scout, and I'd seen that this product was surging, and I didn't realize this, but it was the week before Easter, and all Catholic masses have a candlelight vigil. And so this was like the one time a year that this was a hot product. I sourced 10,000 of them. I still have about 9,999. I mean, horrible. And that was a lesson learned, that like, hey, don't rely solely on tools to launch products. And we have a ton of of things like that. And so it's just part of the experience. You're going to make mistakes. It's fine. Every good entrepreneur does. And that's part of the process. That's part of taking the training wheels off and really like getting good business acumen and understanding how an Amazon business works. It's an essential part of the process is making mistakes.
Yeah. If you think back to those first initial 3-4 years as you're starting, if I come up to you and I'm on year 1, say, and I've got some products in market, and I go to your meetup, David, and I'm like, anything I should look out for, any potholes down the road? I don't know if there's stuff that comes to mind there.
One lesson I would say is fail on paper. And there's a lot of things that are knowable prior to ever placing an order. One metric I really like to look at is landed cost. So you talk to your supplier, they're going to give you a unit cost, right? So say $5 per unit. And typically you can figure out how many cubic meters that is, and you can allocate a shipping cost to it. And you have the dimension. So you can go on Amazon, you can figure out what the FBA fee is, and then you can figure out what category you're in and figure out the referral fee. And there are some products that just simply don't make sense to sell. And one metric that as we look at our portfolio of products, is if you take that landed cost, so your unit cost plus shipping, tariffs, everything, to get that into sellable form, I like to multiply that by 4 and go out and look at competitors. And we have some products that are, you would take that landed cost, multiply it by 3, and it gets tight, especially when you're running PPC. I have launched products in the past where that multiple would be 2x, and there's just simply not enough meat on the bone to make any money. And so I would say failing on paper is something that I had to learn the hard way a couple different times before I, learned that lesson. But that's something I would say, like, if someone is thinking about getting into this business, get an idea of not just one product, but a couple products, figure out your landed cost. There's going to be some estimates. That's okay. But look at that metric. And I think that's huge.
Yeah. One thing to add on this one, if I could go back and give a year 1 Ken some advice on how to level up faster, would be one is there's a lot of people that are blowing smoke in this space, and they're trying to sell courses and they're trying to sell experience and all this. So which is great. So I would say find one that you resonate with that is successful, and like you can track that they're successful and that you resonate with them, and then follow them and learn from them, and then put on your blinders and kind of shut out all the other noise. Because I think I spent like a year bouncing around between multiple different people, and then I was pivoting and doing different things, and I finally found one I just stayed with and went on for a good ways. But I would do that, as well as there's lots of and I have shiny object syndrome. I still do. I think I'm getting better at managing it. But tools and software, there's so many. There's better marketers out there than there is software. I can tell you that one already. People market their software. Everything just solves all the world's problems. And so as you're trying to figure out what tools to add to your stack, make sure that the answer to the question is, it's going to add more net income to the bottom line. How is this service, software, something going to add more net income to the bottom line? And only implement tools that do that. So those are my tips for year 1 to level up.
Yeah.
I got one other I want to add, and this is maybe a personal pet peeve, but as you're like in information seeking mode and you're listening to podcasts, reading newsletters, if somebody mentions passive income, to me, that is a red flag. This is not a passive business, period. You earn it. And it's something that really bugs me about gurus out there that talk about earning all this passive income. Maybe there's some way that they figured out how to make this fully passive, but I have not found that way. And I know a lot of people in this industry, and it's not passive. And so, so I think knowing that on the front end, like I say that like tongue in cheek about gurus, but like also know that going into it is this is not going to be a 2 hour a month type of revenue stream. It's just not. If you want that, go buy a bond and collect interest payments. I mean, this is, you earn it here.
And in terms of scaling this thing up, I mean, you guys had launched, you got some products, you got some revenue. Hopefully, David, they've stuck to your 4x landed cost, something like that. How do you think about scaling up one of these businesses? Because I've seen that it's quite easy to put a product online and much harder to make actual profit from that product and then replicate that at scale. So thoughts on scaling, I guess.
Sure. I've got a couple, then I'll bounce it over to David. So two things. One, systems and processes. That's how you're going to get scale, is find something that works and then do it again, and then refine the process, make it better, and then repeat it, and then create SOPs, and then continuously do that. That will get scale. The other thing is on Amazon specifically, Walmart too, pretty much any place you're selling physical products is advertising. And so one of the ways that I was able to scale pretty quickly to 7 figures is working with you and your team, Pat, and advertising. And so Amazon loves to, they love the advertising dollars. And so you have to get your products in front. You know, there's a saying David always, what's that baseball? If you build it, they will come, right? Like, but if you put a listing on Amazon, the shoppers are not going to go and look at that listing. You have to give it like a lift and a bump. And so it's almost like, it's like a steamrolling effect. So push advertising really hard, do all your due diligence, get your listing, you know, dialed in. And once it's ready to go, push it with advertising really hard. That's really the only way to succeed on Amazon, is to be good at advertising, in my opinion.
There are 2 other things I want to add to that, is when you're in this business, you are entering a game of risk. And to make an analogy to gambling, if you are playing blackjack, there's the $100 tables and then there's the $5 tables. And you want to find yourself a $5 table. And what I'm talking about is MOQ, minimum order quantity. And a lot of suppliers will say minimum order quantity of 1,000 units. And some of them will say 10,000 units. My candlestick holder, that was a 10,000 unit MOQ. And I have a ton of those left. And so I think it's okay to negotiate on MOQ, even if that means paying a little higher. But you see a lot of people, they'll have a sum of cash set aside for this business, and they'll go to the $100 table, right? They'll go to the very high MOQ supplier. And if that product doesn't go well, then you have 9,000 candlestick holders in your basement 5 years later. And so that's something I would encourage people to think about. The stated MOQ is, I think that's more of a filter. And when you're talking to suppliers, I think that's something that you negotiate heavily. And when we're launching products, I would say out of 10 products that we launch, probably 3 of them are home runs. 2 of them do okay, and 5 of them are duds. And that, like, I think that's pretty standard in this industry. And so I think paying attention to MOQ is important. The second thing is sell nice stuff. And I know that sounds like super obvious, but when you go onto Alibaba, you can source really nice stuff, or you can source junk. And the litmus test that I always use is, when I order samples, when it arrives on my front doorstep, I try to put myself in the shoes of a consumer. And when I open the box, what's the first thing that I see? And I ask myself, like, would I leave a 5-star review for this? Would I buy this again? Was I wowed by the product packaging? Was I not? And I think putting in some extra effort to come up with a good product, is really important. And I think that's what hangs up a lot of people, is they're like, I want to start a business, but I don't really know what to sell. And that's the nice thing about Amazon, is you don't need to invent a new product. you can go into an existing market and, read negative reviews, read 1-star reviews, really address the customer complaints, and launch good products. And I think that makes life easier. Selling junk on Amazon is tough. And we've sourced some products that, honestly, like to my right over here is my list of, or like my pile of dud products. And when I look at them, they have one thing in common, and it's that they just are not high quality. And I think there's a reason that they've been sitting over here collecting dust.
Okay.
Yeah. One other thing too, Pat, just to add on to that in terms of like scaling, and something that David and I are both getting better at, is cash flow. You don't really think about it when you start out. You're working with a pile of cash, and you make a couple orders, and you make some sales, and you have to reorder. And so what happens is it's like a steamroller. And so you go from making 5,000 sales to 10,000 sales to 20,000 sales, and in order to get there, that takes cash flow to go back to the supplier to buy those widgets to get them to the people. And so if you're in year one, as you're growing, learn about cash flow. Reach out to someone's experience. Learn more about cash flow, because it will halt your growth. If you're growing too fast, you'll fall flat on your face if you don't manage your cash flow. And so you have to get that trajectory angled in the right direction according to your cash flow, or you'll find yourself in a pinch.
That's a really good point that Ken brought up, is cash flow. And I think if you were to take a success story from 0 to 1 million in 12 months, typically, if you were to hear of someone doing that, going from 0 to 1 million in 12 months, you'd say, man, that person's rich. And having gone through like rapid growth, when I hear those stories, I have sympathy for those people, because I know they are cash flow poor. Because in order to scale that fast, if you're bootstrapping your earnings, it is tight. And really to in that amount of time, unless you've got a crazy cash conversion cycle, you're generally taking on some outside capital. And so, yeah, I think cash flow is huge. And there is such a thing as like growing too fast, running out of inventory, losing ranking, just not having cash to pay your suppliers. And it's a good problem to have, but we've ran into that a couple different times, and it's uncomfortable. So
does this happen mainly when you have all the profit you've gotten, you've cycled it back into new inventory, reorders, stuff like that, and then you're just you don't have any more cash effectively? Is that what happens? Or
yeah, I think a pretty typical scenario would be you place a low MOQ order of 500 units. Those crush it. They do really well. So about midway through that, you say, okay, I need to go order 1,000 units. Okay, at this point in time, you've only sold 250. You're not taking you're taking some of that profit and reinvesting it in your order, but you need more money. You're also not paying yourself out of that profit from your first 250. And so I do still think that a low MOQ order is a risk averse way to start. But it's on like order number 2 and 3, when you're doubling and tripling the size of that there's just not enough meat on the bone. And that's where this 4X multiple comes into play that I'm talking about. If you're making 5% on your cash, it's going to take forever to reinvest your earnings back into the business. If you're making 40%, that cash conversion cycle speeds up. And so it just makes life easier, is having solid profit margins. It makes cash flow management easier.
do you think the 4X landed COGS is the bare minimum sort of ticket to entry? Would you like to see a higher multiple than that? Or is it 4 is pretty, you can build the business on 4, you think?
I would say I built a business on 3. I would not start that business again. It was doable, but it was tough. We were in probably like that 10 to 15% margin after you account for PPC, and it made it so I couldn't grow as fast. You also reach a point on that multiple where like I've never found a 100X product. You know what I mean? Like, and so Yeah, I would say like bigger is better generally. And also like giving yourself some room to play around with the sales price. Cause like we've had this happen where we launch a hero product, it crushes it for a year or two. You have new competitors come into the market, and all of a sudden your 1999 product, if you want to maintain ranking, now needs to sell for 14.99. And so like having that meat on the bone, I think is helpful. I think 4x is what we're shooting for on our product launches, 4 or more. But we still have some active products in our catalog that are probably 2.5 or 3 that are just not crazy high profit, but they do deliver some margin to the bottom line, and we keep them around.
Yeah. And that's 4x prior to cost of acquisition, right? That's prior to ads.
That's prior to ads, yes.
Right.
And that's the other thing is like you need to account, like looking at cost per click of your main keyword is, I'd say that's next level due diligence. Looking at cost per click, factoring in a conversion rate. And you can kind of, when we get our financials, we have something that we look at called PPC gross profit. And that's where we'll take our revenue minus cost of goods sold minus PPC. And boy, can you sell at break even running PPC. And we've had situations where that's been the case. And so we like to see that PPC gross margin north of 30%. That leaves you some meat on the bone to cover your operating expenses.
Yeah. And what's next now that the man's been fired? I mean, it's not just about that anymore. So so you guys have something else in mind. What do you see on the horizon for yourselves, for Amazon, for the businesses?
David, you want to take this one first?
Yeah. So I would say there's 2 primary things that we're focusing on. One is continuing to grow and scale. And you'll hear a lot of people say that the best time to start an Amazon business was 5 years ago or 7 years ago. The next best time is today. I still think that if we're in a baseball game, we're probably in the second or third inning of e-commerce. I went on a road trip with my family last weekend, and we were driving by a shopping mall, and I said, inside of 20 years, that will be residential apartments. That is, I truly feel that e-commerce is a better shopping experience. Carvana is a good example of this. You can now buy a car online, and you can read reviews of people that have actually bought the product. The people that love it, the people that hate it. It's just a better shopping experience. And so I think we're going to continue to grow and scale our existing companies. We do have goals of exiting some of those. We have some goals of making acquisitions. So I'd say that's kind of over here. On the other side, we have this podcast. And, when we started the podcast, our intention was to help people at our meetup, answer some common questions that we had. However, after firing the man and kind of living this for a couple years, I think we've realized the value of this. I'll give you an example. Every morning from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., you cannot get a hold of me. I am eating breakfast with my 2 sons. I would not trade that for anything. I could go back working for the man and they could give me a giant raise. I would not trade that, having had that experience. And so we're really passionate about helping other people fire the man. And so we do have a coaching program. And here's what I'll tell you. And we were talking about this before we started recording. There is a statistic out there that 9 out of 10 people that take a course are not going to execute on it. Ken and I are of the opinion that if we're going to invest time into somebody, damn it, we want it to work. We want to see them have success and fire the man and enjoy the same things that we're enjoying right now. And so there is an application process. We screen that very heavily. But it's something that we're really passionate about. And that's really beyond the monetary piece of it. I mean, sure, making good money is great, but like the freedom to make your own schedule, to not miss sporting events, family events, the ability to really run a business from a laptop wherever in the world you want. There's tremendous value there. And we're passionate about helping people find that. And so we've had a couple guests on the podcast. Kiefer Hoagie, shout out. When he met us, he was working construction. He has since fired the man and has a successful FBA business. And we're looking forward to having more success stories like that.
Let's go. Okay. Well, where can people find the podcast and apply for this coaching if they? I know you guys have been super selective, so it's not a guaranteed thing. But yeah, where can they find that stuff?
Yeah. So podcast is called Firing the Man. You can follow us on social media at Firing the Man on all platforms. And if you go to our website, firingtheman.com, we have a tab called Coaching, and there's an application there you can fill out, and we'll be in touch.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming on. This is really inspirational stuff and also super tactical. These guys are out there doing it. So if you're listening, know that it's possible. It's more than possible with the right expertise in place. Thank you guys for coming on. You're welcome back anytime. We'll do this again.
Pat, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.